They were not holding guns. They were not flying planes. Yet they fought harder than anyone else. When history speaks of World War II, it tells stories of men, generals, soldiers, and pilots. But behind the shadows, there were women, brave, silent, and forgotten. They didn't fight with bullets. They fought with courage, with faith, and with everything they had left. This is their story. In 1940, as Europe burned, women across nations were pulled into a war they never started. In Britain, air raid sirens screamed every night. In France, Nazi soldiers marched through villages. And in every dark corner of the world, women were holding the world together while everything around them collapsed. Some worked in secret. Some smuggled food to soldiers. Some carried messages under their clothes. And some never came home again. In occupied France, there was a young woman named Lucy Aubrac. She wasn't a soldier. She was a teacher, a wife, and soon a spy. When the Nazis captured her husband, Lucy planned an impossible rescue. She walked into the enemy's office, her hands shaking, pretending to be loyal. But under her calm face burned the fire of defiance. That night, she risked her life to free her husband from Nazi hands. Bullets flew, soldiers shouted, and smoke filled the streets. But Lucy escaped, and with her, the resistance found hope. She became one of the most wanted women in France, not because she killed, but because she dared to fight without a weapon. Meanwhile, across the sea in Poland, another woman, Irina Sendler, was walking through the Warsaw Ghetto. The streets were filled with starving children, surrounded by barbed wire and death. Irina had one mission: to save as many as she could. With a small box of medicine and forged papers, she smuggled Jewish children out of the ghetto one by one. She hid them in suitcases, under carts, even inside toolboxes. Every night she risked being caught. Every morning she started again. By the end of the war, she had saved more than 2,500 children. When the Nazis discovered her secret, they broke her legs, but not her spirit. From her hospital bed, she whispered to a nurse, "Keep the list safe. Don't let their names die." That list, hidden inside a glass jar, would one day reunite those children with their families. In Japan, as the war dragged on, women were told to stay silent, to serve, not to question. But deep inside, some couldn't ignore the truth anymore. They nursed the wounded, hid civilians during air raids, and buried the dead in secret. They knew they could be punished, but still they chose compassion over fear. And in their quiet defiance, they showed more strength than any weapon could ever hold. These were women who didn't wait to be called heroes. They simply acted because their hearts refused to surrender. They were spies. They were nurses. They were mothers. They were symbols of hope in a world drowning in hate. And as the bombs fell and empires burned, they stood their ground. They fought without weapons, but the world forgot them until now. They were called the Shadows of War, women who vanished from history yet changed the fate of nations. They didn't wear medals, they carried secrets. In 1941, when Europe was on fire, the British government created a secret network, the Special Operations Executive, known only as SOE. Its mission was clear: sabotage, resistance, and espionage. But what shocked everyone was that many of its best agents were women. One of them was Violette Sabo. She was just 23, a young widow, a mother, and soon a legend. After her husband died in North Africa, Violette didn't mourn, she volunteered. Trained in parachuting, weapons, and codes, she jumped into Nazi-occupied France with a single purpose: to destroy what killed the man she loved. Her last mission began at dawn. The forests were silent, the radio crackled with coded words, and Violette, dressed like a civilian, carried her pistol under her coat. When German soldiers ambushed her convoy, she refused to surrender. She covered her men as they escaped, holding the line alone until her gun went empty. She was captured, tortured, and finally executed. Her last words were, "Tell my daughter I fought for her freedom." Her courage echoed across generations, a woman who fought without fear and without regret. While Violette's story was one of defiance, another woman's story was one of mystery. Nancy Wake, the most wanted woman in all of France. They called her the White Mouse because she always escaped. Born in New Zealand, raised in Australia, Nancy became a spy for the Allies. She smuggled pilots, carried coded messages, and blew up Nazi supply lines. Her charm disarmed soldiers, her wit fooled officers, her courage terrified the Gestapo. They put a 5 million franc bounty on her head. But she didn't hide, she fought harder. In one night raid, she led over 7,000 resistance fighters into battle, destroying bridges and supply routes before D-Day. When asked how she survived, she simply said, "I was too busy to be afraid." And then there was Noor Inayat Klan, a quiet, gentle woman, born in Moscow, raised in London, and descendant of Indian royalty. She believed in peace, but when war came, she couldn't stay silent. Noor became the first Indian-origin woman to be a British spy in enemy territory. She was trained in Morse code and sent to Paris alone. Within weeks, every other radio operator was caught. But Noor stayed, transmitting messages for months, knowing every signal could be her last. When the Nazis finally captured her, they offered her freedom in exchange for betrayal. She refused. Her final word was liberté, freedom. Even her enemies respected her bravery. She died in a concentration camp, but her voice still travels through the static of history. These women didn't fight with anger. They fought with purpose. Every lie they told, every code they sent, every risk they took, carried the weight of 1,000 lives. They turned fear into fire, silence into strategy, and vulnerability into victory. Their stories remind us that war isn't just about the men who fight, but also about the women who refused to be victims. They didn't ask for glory, they just did what was right. Even today, their names are whispered like secret prayers. Violette, Nancy, Noor, and thousands more, known only by the courage they carried. When the guns stopped, the real pain began. The world saw victory, but for millions of women, the war never ended. They carried the memories, the wounds, and the ghosts of those they loved. No medals, no recognition. Just silence. In 1945, the cities of Europe were nothing but ruins. Hospitals overflowed with soldiers broken in body and mind. And there, among blood, smoke, and despair, were women who kept them alive. They weren't soldiers. They were nurses, mothers, and strangers who refused to turn away. In London, a nurse named Elsie Ott worked day and night as bombs fell outside. She became the first woman to airlift wounded soldiers across continents. No one had done it before. She wrote down everything: how to carry, how to treat, how to save. Her notes would change military medicine forever. When asked why she risked her life, she simply said, "Because they were someone's sons." In Russia, women didn't wait for permission to fight. They became snipers, doctors, and mechanics. The most feared among them, Lyudmila Pavlenchenko. She was called Lady Death. With 309 confirmed kills, she was one of the deadliest snipers in history. But behind the cold precision was a broken heart. She once said, "Every shot I took, I remembered a friend I lost." When the war ended, she returned home, not to applause, but to loneliness. The battlefield had taken everything from her, except her memories. And while some became heroes, others suffered in silence. Across Asia and Europe, thousands of women were taken, used, and forgotten. They weren't fighters or spies, just victims of a war that never asked their names. One of them, a Korean woman named Sun Yi, was taken to serve Japanese soldiers. She was just 17. When the war ended, she walked home barefoot, miles through burned villages, and never spoke of what happened again. But every year, she placed a white flower at her door. She said it was for the girls who never came home. In Japan, women faced hunger, loss, and shame. They buried husbands, brothers, and sons, then rebuilt their cities from ashes. No help came, no heroes returned. Yet every morning they swept the dust, cooked what little they had, and taught their children not to hate. That quiet strength became the backbone of a broken nation. These women never asked for fame. They never wanted to be remembered. But history needs them, because their courage was not in killing, but in surviving. When you look back at World War II, don't just see the soldiers and the generals. See the woman writing letters by candlelight, the nurse holding the dying soldier's hand, the mother hiding her child from bombs, the spy waiting in silence for a message that never comes. They fought without weapons, but their hearts carried the weight of the entire world. And as time moves on, their names may fade, but their courage still whispers through the ruins of history. Because sometimes, the greatest battles are fought by those who never pick up a gun.